We are back, everybody. Welcome to the Politics Aside podcast. I'm Justin Brainerd.
I'm Matthew Neville.
We are the highest-rated political commentary show on the award-winning Evansville Podcast Network. We appreciate you tuning in today. We have another special guest. I brought in some reinforcements for Matt after
not that I need it, but
weeks of verbal beatdowns.
Backup is always good.
I'm bringing in the heavy hitters. Michael Leppert, Contrariana.com, lobbyist, blogger, author. I'm staring at his face on a book at me. He is with us today, and he's going to have a lot of unique perspectives on things going around the state, and I want to talk to him a little bit about the book business and some other things. Ironically enough, I've crossed the halls with Michael in the Statehouse quite a bit, and we really didn't get to talking until a couple weeks ago. I was at Barnes & Noble in Evansville, and I'm perusing, the book section on the second floor, and I see Mark Levin's book, and all of a sudden I see Michael Leppert staring at me from the bookshelf, and I'm like, I know that guy. What in the hell is this? So I pull his book down, and I'm like, interesting. So I catch him in the hallway the next day, and I'm like, dude, I didn't know you wrote a book. He goes, how did you know I wrote a book? I go, because your face was staring at me at Barnes & Noble in Evansville. He was completely floored. Had no idea there was a copy of his book in Evansville. So he told me not to buy it. He told me to keep it on the shelves, and he would get me a copy. So Michael is with us today. Do you want to talk a little bit before we get to Michael? And you can feel free to chime in, but what witty banter do you have for me this week in the world of Donald Trump?
I mean, we are recording. This is Friday morning. I'm waiting for a notification at any given point of the results of the House vote on the Trump Care bill. I know he doesn't like it to be called Trump Care, but damn it, we're going to call it Trump Care.
Well, it's better than Ryan Care at this point, because I'd rather, if this thing's going to go down in a ball of flames, I'd rather it have Donald Trump's name on it. But interesting times.
I mean, the big news coming from yesterday was from Mick Mulvaney that Trump is essentially saying take it or leave it, which is a very bold strategy.
I've been saying it for a while. The only way you're going to rein in the crazy right in our party is to tell them to take it or leave it, and then when they leave it, you blame keeping Obamacare on them. Period. Mark Meadows, you did it. This is on you. Sorry for you. Do you think anything that the far right is trying to get done is going to pass anywhere?
No.
The Senate's going to laugh at it and walk away.
The Senate's not going to pass this bill anyways.
Exactly. So what are we doing here? I've always had a problem with the far right in our party, and again, I think I sort of jokingly say it, but I'm kind of starting to feel like Nelson Rockefeller at some point. It's just been interesting, to say the least. But yes, we will hopefully have a vote on some sort of healthcare plan.
It's supposed to happen today. I mean, I get the idea of the Donald Trump strategy of take it or leave it, and that I'm assuming that he's going to just take it to these congressional districts in 2018 and say, this Congress that we have now isn't going to pass this bill. Send me ones that do. I don't think that's going to be a very good strategy with how unpopular he is and the fact that these districts are going to be ones that are pretty conservative as it is, trying to get a more moderate, and there's going to be very difficult.
Well, my question to you is this, though. Is he really that unpopular in the places where a lot of these guys are going to be? I mean, yeah, he's unpopular on the East Coast and the West Coast, but a lot of these congressional districts, I don't know that he is as unpopular as the Democrats are banking on him to be. And the map certainly doesn't help the Democrats in 2018.
Not in the Senate.
Not in the Senate. In the House. But even then, I mean, you got to win a lot of seats to pick up the majority in the House.
I mean, there were 22 seats that the Democrats have to pick up, and there's 24, 25 Republicans that congressional district that Hillary won
that are actually.
So I mean, it's
conceivable,
especially
but you're going to need a pretty big wave.
You're going to need a wave, but you have the typical midterm election after a presidential election, especially with how vastly unpopular nationwide Donald Trump is going to be. I don't get this Trump strategy that he's going to try to get more moderates in these House districts to get him the bills that he wants. Right. I don't think that's a very good long-term strategy.
Well, I think it's a great long-term strategy to keep the Republicans in power. I think the more far right we go, the sooner the other shoe drops. But I just don't know that it's plausible to do it.
No.
Which is the thing. And I love that you said, I don't think I like the Trump strategy. That's ironic because you don't like any of Trump's strategies at this point. Not a lot of us do, actually.
That's there's a good 1% that he's done that I'm not terribly unhappy with. But
which is what? I'm surprised. I'm shocked and
I
awed.
like this pick for VA secretary as someone that works
Okay.
fighting the VA. I can tell you that it's certainly helpful to have
absolutely.
someone that actually understands how it works.
Right. No, I'm with you. I'm with you there. Okay.
Unpopular in my party. I'm not mad about the Keystone Pipeline. I'm much more moderate when it comes to the energy issues. Breaking news here,
Whoa, Michael.
but I tend to be a little more moderate on the
wanna jump in on
energy
this?
issues.
I
but
don't know when to dive in here.
You dive anytime you want.
I've already missed like 6 opportunities, so
Hey, don't be. I didn't bring you on here to be bashful, man.
I'm getting a rash over here in the chair.
Come on, man.
No,
Jump in.
actually, I tend to line up with him on the pipeline. So.
We're all in agreement.
Yes.
We're singing Kumbaya,
Yes.
and Kumbaya doesn't sell. here,
Kumbaya
people.
does not sell.
It doesn't sell.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
We'll get there.
The
Don't
other
worry.
5 things I've been pulling back on.
Well, and we've also got Neil Gorsuch should cruise to a Supreme Court seat. He's making the Democrats in the Senate look completely dumb. It's amazing. You take one sentence out of Al Franken's questioning of Neil Gorsuch, and he somehow becomes a liberal lion. You watch the rest of it, and the guy's Stuart Smalley. Neil Gorsuch is running circles around the Democratic Party. I think this is going to go poorly. You're not going to filibuster the man. He's going on the court. Come on, man.
Chuck Schumer said he's going to.
Chuck Schumer can try, but it isn't going to work. No way. He gets 60 on the fly.
It doesn't matter what they do because they've got the high ground. It doesn't matter how this ends.
I
Over
don't
time,
disagree with that.
historically, they've got the high ground on this. They can
true.
They can play jacks in the Senate chamber. It doesn't matter. This is Merrick Garland's seat, and it was mishandled. And 3 years from now, we're going to forget about the words, and we're going to remember how this was handled. I did a lot of research on the Supreme Court appointment process, and this is not the thing that's going to pop up on Google 10 years from now. It's going to say those Senate Republicans didn't do their job.
Interesting take. Because I don't think anybody, from a population that can't name one Supreme Court justice, I really don't think the process of how Merrick Garland did or did not get on the court lives longer than 20 minutes after Neil Gorsuch gets on the court, except for guys like us.
Robert Bork became a adjective.
Yeah, but that was really
But why do people know about Robert Bork now? Because they did a bunch of Googling when all this crap started after Scalia died, and so that's
it did become
it was
an
a
adjective
relearning
long
process.
before.
We
Yeah.
Googled it, which means we'll learn it short term.
That's true.
Several times.
Yeah,
over.
that's a fair point because
Yes.
to get borked is a thing that's been talked about since it happened, and really that was sort of the beginning of the end of the comedy that goes with Supreme Court appointments. It used to be, are you qualified to read the Constitution and do your thing or not? And now it's, you get into all the semantics and litmus tests and everything else, which I think was the beginning of the end of a lot of this stuff. But he's going on the court.
He'll end up getting confirmed.
I think there's no
disagree.
question. And, and quite frankly, I thought the Garland thing was a misstep too. And I've said that on the podcast, but it worked. So I don't know that Chuck Schumer is quite as politically savvy as Mitch McConnell is, though.
I mean, if we want to go with the concept and the idea that if you're in the last year of your presidency, you shouldn't be able to name a Supreme Court justice, seeing all this Russia stuff, Donald Trump may be in his last.
What they're doing is they're opening the door for the argument that you shouldn't be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice in your first year of your term.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you should serve a year, prove that you can do the job before you take on the
Right.
big task of appointing a
this
Supreme
is
Court
the-
justice.
And this is the slippery slope that I didn't like about the Garland thing. The problem was he was qualified.
He was
and to give him
I think he had the
don't-
most qualifications of someone that had been nominated in decades in
to
terms
that
of
point
service.
until Neil Gorsuch was nominated. But yes, both of them would have made fine justices. I don't think that was the problem. And I think that's exactly why they couldn't go through the motions. Because you open that Pandora's box and you give him these hearings and he does well.
Yeah,
How do you defeat
everyone
him?
knew you'd bring it to a vote.
How
He's
do you
going to
defeat
get
him?
the votes.
Right.
Easy.
And that's why McConnell was just like, we're not even going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Which, and again, it's the law of unintended consequences. You keep the court 6-5 or 5-4. Sorry, 5-4. There's not 11 justices.
FDR over here trying to pack the
I know,
court,
right?
man.
Right? Woof. It's early, and I've only had one
See,
sip of
and I know
coffee.
about that because I Googled this last year. I learned all about that.
You
That
sure
was
you weren't
fantastic.
alive during that, Michael? Just saying. No, Michael's a younger guy. Let's not be mean to the guest. Well, again, I think it's the tit for tat that I think we need to sort of figure out how to work around. And I think we quit playing games, and hopefully at some point we get back to it. But to your point, that doesn't sell. So
Yeah.
we get to talk about it on podcasts like this and hope we get people to, at least come a little bit off of their high horses. Let's get to you, Michael.
Great.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Again, it's really been cool to get to know you a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You've listened to the podcast. You've told me that
I'm now a regular.
You are
Regular listener.
I like it. We've got 9 of them now. We've got 9 of them.
Moving on up in the world.
We add 1 or 2 a week. So you have a blog. It's a very interesting. You've got some pretty hot takes. Some interesting writing. I like your writing style. It's really good. Contrariana.com.
Thank you.
For those of you that are listening, check it out. And then you wrote a book.
I did write a book.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
What was that like?
Honestly, writing the book was an exercise in inertia.
Yeah.
I had been, and largely the book is a chronicle of the blog, but it's not in chronological order. It's not from the start to the cutoff date, which was right after the primary last year. It's divided up and organized by topic.
Okay.
So that someone who wants to do research on, say, Mike Pence and RFRA, they can read the chapter on that and not have to spend time flying around from the index back to the body. And so that was sort of the point of the book, was that over time, when you write and you don't have a boss telling you what to write about, you still do tend to gravitate towards certain topics, and
Sure.
there are a handful of areas that I tend to spend most of my writing time in, and
Sure.
so if you take them and you organize those in the subsets of chronological order, sometimes they can tell a pretty good story. And some of the chapters I think are better stories than the others. Some of them are just more of a snapshot in time. But
Sure.
But RFRA was a good story. I think the Syrian refugee crisis is a good story. The chapter on women and women's reproductive rights, I think, tells a good chronological story of the handling or mishandling of those issues in the State House. And so it was not difficult. I think a lot of, doing the writing and connecting the dots was fun. I enjoyed doing it. And that's the reason why I do this. I think that helps. I'm doing it because I enjoy doing it. I'm not doing it because someone told me to.
Right.
I started writing because someone told me to, and I immediately quit following instructions, like on hour 2, not day 2. It was
Right.
like, I can't do that. I'll do this, and so that is an important part of why I've been able to keep doing it. And
Sure.
I've met a lot of writers over the last year, especially since the book came out, and that tends to be the common theme from all of them: the just keep doing it, just keep doing it. And so I've developed a style.
Yeah,
guess,
you
is
have.
lack
It's
of
very good.
lack of a better word.
The book is titled "Contrary to Popular Belief: A Chronicle of a Progressive in Indiana." Again, a lot of really good stuff in here. Talk to me a little bit about what's your overall thoughts of the State House, how it all works, and specifically life sort of as it's changed from Governor Pence to Governor Holcomb, or even when it changed from Governor Daniels to Governor Pence.
Did I write this script? This is awesome.
I'm teeing you up here, man. Like I said, I want you to come back. I gotta make you look good. I'm gonna give you some red meat here.
I'm gonna cut off your question right there.
Please do.
This is an awesome thing that people. I don't think that people that are sort of recreational viewers of the State House and of Indiana politics don't really get. After there were 16 years of Democrat control in the governor's office, and a lot of that time I spent as an employee, not because I was into politics, but just because that's when I came out of SPEA from IU and went to work for the government. By the time that reign ended, I was already out into the private sector, but had spent a lot of my formative years in and around government. And so when we moved from the O'Bannon-Kernan end of that term into the Mitch Daniels term, that was a real shock to the system. And I don't mean ideologically. There was some of that, but it was mainly a shot of adrenaline into state government. And everything started moving at light speed. There were all these things that he wanted to do, and he wanted to do them now, and there was no reason to wait. And there's no dust settling anywhere. And if you got time to lean, you got time to clean. It was that kind of attitude around the State House. And he was moving faster than the institutions really were even prepared for. And I remember going through that adjustment period, and it was like, whoa. I didn't have time to think about that. I didn't have time to ponder it or come up with an opposing view or get my people there for the press conference that he scheduled an hour ago and it's already over. And, that sort of stuff was going on. So that the hallowed halls of state government were rocked when he came in. But we adjusted. Yeah. And we all got used to it. The agencies got used to it. It trickled down to the people in government, and we just got used to moving faster. Mm-hmm. And then he was done, and Mike Pence came. Yeah. And Mike Pence didn't show up in 2013 in the session until March.
Right.
He ran a campaign from ahead the whole time. They expected him to win, and for lack of a better description, it appeared that he was not prepared to govern. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that he did silly things. We went from light speed to, we went from driving an Indy car to a school bus.
Right.
And that adjustment was actually harder.
Really?
It was harder for me, it was harder to slow down than it was to speed up. Because when you're speeding up, you're thinking, well, we're going someplace. Great.
Right.
Let's go wherever we're going, let's get there. With Pence, it was like, came to a screeching halt and everything it was throwback all of a sudden. There was no reason to do it. Technology had advanced over 10 years during that time as well. Right. Which sounds silly now, but the fact of the matter is everyone's walking around communicating all the time. Well, 10 years earlier, no one was doing that. And so there's no time to be, letting moss grow. And that's exactly how it felt.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes, and in reviewing your blog, speaking about the gubernatorial election, you had written that no matter the outcome of the election, Indiana was going to have a better governor as a result of the 2016 election. So, you obviously did not have the highest viewpoints on Governor Pence. Talk a little bit about, the thinking of that and kind of the transition we've seen from Governor Pence to Governor Holcomb.
People are going to think that I made these questions up. It's awesome. I've said that, I've written that, and I've said that a lot, and it irritates people. And that's not why I do it. I don't think that Mike Pence was a good governor. I don't think that, and there's ideological differences, but he was not a good manager of government. And the mistakes that I detail in the book and in columns since then, document that. And very few people over time have said, oh, you're wrong about that. He handled the Syrian refugee great, or he handled RFRA great, or he handled the Porter Novelli contract great. No one argues that. So his management of government was not great. And he's who people are looking to now to be the better manager of government. And that's scary to me. Ideologically is a whole other conversation. But Eric Holcomb, I think, has surrounded himself with people who are prepared to run government. And that was, I think, the resume that he would look for in a person that he would bring into the administration. Some of these guys are known quantities who've been around before. But the people who aren't known quantities are there to do their job, and they're not there to fit the ideological mold first and figure out if they can do the job later. It's quite the reverse, and so that is something that does not surprise me, and something that was predictable last fall. And so I was pretty confident that we were going to upgrade, and I think it's pretty clear that we have. Now, he has not had my favorite week. This is the worst week of Governor Holcomb's time, in my view. But he's already done some awesome things, and so I'm feeling pretty good about that prediction.
How much do you think the shift from Congress to state government is an issue? Because I've seen it before. I was in Kentucky when Ernie Fletcher came from Congress and ran state government. Obviously, I think the state party made a big mistake in not going after the attorney general seat as hard as they did, and the Democrats were smart enough to put the biggest. I don't have the highest regard for Greg Stumbo, but he was the pit bull they had to have. And there's a certain, I don't want to say arrogance, but there is kind of a certain arrogance when you come from Washington back to state government.
Sure.
And again, the legislative branch and the executive branch are two totally different things.
Absolutely.
So do you think that had something to do with it, with some of the views that you take in terms of Governor Pence's performance at that point?
They absolutely do, and that's something that I can talk about. I'm a SPEA guy. It's the second time that's come up, but
Sure.
I went to college for the purposes of being in government, and so this is I didn't happen to be there.
Right.
And so I evaluate people from that regard first.
Sure.
You know, if you run a campaign, you know, I defer a little bit to you guys on campaign tactic and predictions and those sorts of things, because clearly I'm not the best predictor, as nobody predicted last year anyway.
Well, in fairness, I was going to say
Yeah,
none of us, even those of us that have
Right.
done it, were wrong.
Yeah.
So
But I do know about government administration, and Mike Pence didn't have a resume of running government, and a lot of people don't. You know, but being in Congress doesn't mean you can be an executive branch person, and I'll flip that around on you for a second. I had several conversations with Evan Bayh when he was in the Senate, and that did not suit him.
no.
And all the things that you want to say about Evan Bayh, and I could say a lot about Evan Bayh too,
Right.
and won't. But one
Right.
thing that was legitimate about Evan Bayh, I believe, is that he did not wear the seat in the U.S. Senate very well. He
No.
was uncomfortable there. He was one of 100, and he was very frank about it when he was there. About the challenges that
Sure.
creates. You know, he had been in executive positions. That's how he thinks. That's how he approached government.
Right.
And being a legislator is very different. And so one's not better than the other, but they don't have a lot in common with
Right.
regard to what you do day
Sure.
in and day out. And so
This leads me to an interesting question, because, I mean, I've long respected Senator Bayh. I didn't think he was particularly an awe-inspiring senator, but, you know, he served the state well. I've no qualms about that. But he was done. I mean, he was checked out long before he ever decided not to run. And quite frankly, a lot of my career was spawned by that decision. You know, I was Larry Bashan's campaign manager in 2010. I interviewed on Valentine's Day, which was a Sunday. Then next day, Evan Bayh decides he's not running for the United States Senate. The dominoes fall. Ellsworth runs for the Senate seat. Van Haften ends up running for Congress. And the rest is history. We run to a 20-point win,
Right.
and Larry's locked down the 8th District for the foreseeable future. So I have a lot of respect for Evan Bayh, and I appreciate how he's kind of inadvertently helped my career. Why in the world do you think that he jumped into the Senate race this year? Why in the world, if he was that miserable the first time, did he think it was going to be any better?
I think I might want to defer to Matt on that.
Matt?
My theories are not flattering on that.
Fair.
I mean, one thing I know about.
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot with
Yeah.
your relationship with Evan, but
I
just in
don't
terms
have-
of,
I don't have
let's say
much of one, so it's
hypothetical,
not-
let's just say hypothetically, you hated a job, you were kind of done with that job, and then out of nowhere you decide to go for that job again, and basically write the same press release that you wrote when you walked away.
I will say that I know him well enough to know that there are calculations that are made in every decision
Sure.
that he makes.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is not necessarily a critique. It is in some ways, because one of the problems with him is that predictability and that litmus test constantly going on. And I think that a lot of people assumed that this was about something else, and why, you know, when he was leaving the Senate back then, when you were, you know, staking your claim to southwestern Indiana, there was a reason for that too.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, I don't think it was just his frustration with being in the U.S. Senate. There were other things he planned on doing. There were other opportunities that he had. And I think that running for the U.S. Senate, after you've been there and done everything that he's done, was not just a singleness of purpose. There were other things probably on his mind, and he did not call me and tell me what they were.
Sure.
But some of them, you know, we're looking at a presidential campaign where she was supposed to win.
Yeah.
And he was close to her.
Right.
And there were, you know, and I'm sure that he didn't beg to get back into that race. I'm sure there were phone calls made. You know, everybody gets drafted to some extent anymore.
Sure. Absolutely.
That one I believe.
Right.
The draft Delph thing, I'm not
Right.
sure I believe.
Yeah,
We're going
right.
to talk about that later this afternoon in another forum. And he's my buddy, but so I don't know how I'm going to manage that one. But
I'm gonna go ahead and let our listeners know. Michael's got to get back to Indy later this afternoon to tape. What are you taping again? Which is the show?
oh, it's some little thing.
Lawmakers.
Indiana Week in Review.
Indiana Week in Review. I always get the Lawmakers and Week in Review. So you can watch it on WNIN this weekend. But we're gonna give you the real scoop. He's going to tell us what he really thinks. So watch the show on Sunday, listen to our podcast on Monday, and you'll get Michael Leppert unplugged. So the drafting thing, like you just reelected John Zodi as state party chairman. Every candidate that's come out at a statewide level is somewhat of a retread. At what point does the Democratic Party in the state of Indiana decide to go recruit new talent? You've got some.
I want to talk about that.
Christina Hale Dan Forstall wrote, and we've talked about this, wrote
Dan.
an
Love Dan.
excellent postscript to the party saying we need to move forward. Pete Buttigieg, for God's sake, the dude ran an excellent campaign for state or for national party chairman. As a Republican, you've got names that scare the hell out of me in this state. And yet it seems to me that the Democratic Party has no interest in pushing them forward.
Well, you named three.
Yeah.
And they're all, I don't know Mayor Pete yet, but I am a fan, so I hope to meet him and get to know him over time. And I agree, he's the star right now, and that's not going to fade. He's a sharp guy, and 10 years from now, he will still be a star.
Yep.
But I'm not a big believer in the bench, and I never have been.
Okay.
And the continued going to the bench to me is wasted energy on either side.
Interesting.
There's nothing that prepares somebody to be a good legislator or a good public servant other than being that. Mm-hmm. And so the next man up thing, and we're seeing it to the extreme on the Republican side in Indiana. It's a domino thing, and it started, and I've written about this several times and talked about it a lot. Ever since Senator Coates announced his retirement, we've been in domino mode on the Republican side.
Right.
Why is the fight for the U.S. Senate seat or the U.S. Senate nomination next year, between Messer and Rokita? And there are a couple of other guys who have thrown in, but the party is looking to the bench, and that the U.S. House of Representatives is not the minor league of the Cubs.
No.
And so
definitely not.
There are plenty of other people that the Republicans could also look at, and so it's just it's a matter of practice that I think we just need to get away from. Donald Trump is a great example. He doesn't have a history of votes that people can say, well, look what you did. We're trying to pin him on where he felt on the Iraq War.
He doesn't have a consistency of comment, for God's sake. He's contradicting himself before he put a period at the end of the sentence.
But let's pretend for a second that he did.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, what he didn't represent anything. But what bothers me is that the only person who we're going to look to is these 6 guys to run for governor, or these 4 people to run for U.S. Senate, and they look to the bench, and the bench is like this phantom anchor around a party's neck. There are plenty of people out there who are capable of inspiring that aren't on the bench right now.
Right.
And so we need to look beyond the bench anyway.
But I agree with that, and I think that's more of what I'm talking about, though. Yeah. I mean, you go back to the same, but you go back to the same 5 names every time. I mean, why not push Christina Hale? Why not push a Dan Forstall? Why not get some of these guys and figure out how to recruit candidates? I think this is one of the things that both sides are having problems with is what is the role of the parties anymore? Well, and I think the relevancy is eroded.
The problem that I have is that the Democrat in Indiana still needs to be a Democrat. And so it needs to be somebody who is going to stand up for Democrat principles first and inspire Democrats first. And when you can get those people inspired and ready to rock behind someone like Pete Buttigieg up in South Bend, other people will be attracted to that.
I don't disagree.
And so my problem is the Republicrat thing. This is a leaning red state.
I'm a Hoosier Democrat. I'm a Hoosier Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Hoosier Democrat.
And I'm a Hoosier Democrat.
So basically, you're a Republican, is what you're saying, is all you're telling me. You're trying to disavow the liberal wing of your party and pretend like you're a moderate Republican.
Yeah, well, you can be conservative with regard to how you run government. You can be conservative, and people say they're fiscal conservatives. That's a misunderstood concept, but I don't like wasting money. Okay, I'm not big into wasting money, and I'm not big into investing in programs that fail.
Right.
But I'm also big on a woman's right to choose, and I'm big on civil rights for everyone, and I'm big on those things, and that's what differentiates me from Republicans here. But 90% of the things we're going to sit down and talk about, we're going to agree on a lot of that.
Right.
And so you don't have to go out and say, I'm not sure if I can vote for this choice bill. I'm not sure if I can vote for this civil rights bill. Yes, you can, and you know what? You can pound on the lectern and give good reasons why, and people are drawn to that. And there are moderate voters, which is the biggest sector growing right now, who will be convinced by somebody who's convincing that they are going to go in there and give it their all. And Pete is one of those guys, and he is not a Republicrat, and I want to see him continue to rise.
I do too, much to my party's detriment. Well, look, the guy's a veteran. The guy served his country honorably. He's doing a nice job in South Bend. He ran as good a race. I talked about it a little bit, but to me, it felt like Kennedy in '56, where he does everything right. He raises his profile pronouncedly, but losing is the best thing that ever happened to him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Because
exactly
at the end
what
of
I
the
wanted
day,
to happen. It
because
happened
at the-
exactly as I would
Yeah,
have picked.
because at the end of the day, he's raised his profile nationally. Everybody likes him, and he was exactly right. This Bernie Clinton thing needs to stop.
Absolutely.
Because all it's going to do is turn the Democratic Party into the Republican Party, where we have this warring faction of 30, the minority of the majority that runs the show, as opposed to doing what we all set out to do, and purity is the only thing that matters. And to his point, Hillary Clinton's not president because she lost the Midwest. Mm-hmm. She lived on the East Coast and the West Coast and thought that was enough to get it done. And Donald Trump picked off enough 20,000 voters in how many ever congressional districts it was, 8 or 9, and he's president of the United States today. So, and he's right on. And until, to me, the elite wing of the Democratic Party gets off their high horse a little bit, you're gonna have the voters are there. I hate to tell you this, but it's a rough map to look at as a Republican if we're not careful. But I think a lot of times the Republicans get away with having just made fewer mistakes than the Democratic Party did. It's not that the Republican Party is so well run; it's just we're slightly better run than the Democratic Party in a lot of ways.
Here.
Well, I think nationally too.
Well, but that, again, that's seasonal.
Right. But still.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think it's not that the Republican Party is doing anything great. It's just that we seem to mess up less when it comes to election time.
You have a geographical advantage just on geographic
in the state, sure.
Well,
but
I'm just talking about swaths of land. So the gerrymandering thing favors you just on its face because if you just look at a map in passing, which is how Americans consume information now, they look at all of it in passing and they don't turn the page very often. You look at it and you think, well, this has got to be a Republican, huge advantage. Then you have to look at where all the people are, and so those two things are in conflict. And I talk a little bit about that in the book. But that thing is the fascinating aspect of where we're at politically. I think in this country is the difference between rural and urban.
Right.
Having said that, I think that it's. Someone told me a long time ago that the people who win elections are the people who make the voters feel better. Mm-hmm. And that's a different way of saying whoever is inspiring, whoever can have the common person be drawn to them. Now, that part in retrospect is not surprising that Hillary did not do well there. Mm-hmm. That has been her weakness, her public persona weakness from the start is that she's not an inspiring person, a warm person that invites. She's not Bill. And that's Bill's, trump card on everybody.
Butter, He makes no pun intended. No pun intended.
Yeah. And so in retrospect, even as off the wall and nuts that some of us think Donald Trump is, he inspires people who want to hear what he's saying, because he sure tells it like it isn't, and he tells it hard. Well,
he tells it both ways in the same sentence, and people just stop listening when they hear what they want to hear, and that was always my frustration.
I got a little story about that.
Please do.
Of all the columns that I've written, I had to correct one, and it's a big deal when you write what I write because you're taking opinions that people are mad about from time to time, well, weekly, but you can't be incorrect.
Right.
I mean, you can come to a conclusion that people don't like, but you can't be incorrect. And so I wrote a column right after the Benghazi hearing and said, was making fun of Hillary about one of her flaws is she's not fun. She's not funny. People aren't drawn to her. And she spent 12 hours putting up with the best that the Republicans could throw at her and beat them, in my opinion, beat them. And I said, but she could have thrown some levity in there. She could have so much as cracked a smile. She went through all this with not so much as cracking a smile, which was factually incorrect. She did, in fact, a few times crack a smile and giggle technically. Yeah. So of all of my writing, I had to beat back the wrath of the Democrats because they were PO'd about that, and they're correct. But that's exactly what we ended up fighting about is that you've got a candidate now who is not fun, is not funny. It doesn't. People aren't happy to see her. They're not happy to listen to her.
Right.
And that's that. In the end, I think you can put all of the spreadsheets down. and say, if people had been drawn to Hillary Clinton's personality,
Right.
she's president right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I think, quite frankly, it's not even that. I think you're right, but I think there were 5 other ways she should have been president right now too.
Oh, sure.
But to your point, that absolutely puts it over the top.
Right.
I think.
But one of the things that's an advantage for Democrats that Republicans don't have is it's hard to beat on the table and say, I'm not for civil rights.
Oh, I completely agree.
I'm for taking away choices of women. It's a lot easier to inspire off the platform that Democrats tend to be drawn to, in my opinion, than it is the Republican platform.
Right.
If you have a personality that makes people that draws people to you, I think
It's
that you
the
have
connection that's always been kind of her issue, and that was the forte that Bill always had. Is he could bite his lip and do the thumb thing, and I feel your pain, and just get everybody.
That's awesome.
Everyone could just listen to him and really connect with him, and she never really had that. I think part of that was she was never really that comfortable in the public sphere, especially getting compared to Bill.
Candidate in the history of all time, and not because she wasn't qualified to be president. She'd make an excellent president. I really think she would. She is a horrific candidate.
Yeah, well,
it's not her qualifications. It's just she's not built to be a candidate.
Because Trump won, he's not the worst candidate ever. Is that?
No, I think Trump was just as bad. It was absolutely the worst of 2 evils.
His mistakes were disqualifying. I mean,
absolutely.
In my mind, they were.
I certainly was not a Trump guy. I never have been, and I've been pretty outlandish about that. But
I hear what you're saying.
But she just was not built to run for national office. Just her constitution. She's brilliant. I think she would have made a great president. The really good candidates usually are not the best elected officials.
Right. And that is a big part of my daily life.
How do you break down that conundrum?
Engagement. The fundamental thing and the fundamental thing that drives me in my writing and in any appearances that I make is about engagement. Mm-hmm. Lee Hamilton spoke at a lunch with Richard Lugar last year at the Economic Club, and he said the engagement is, I think the quote was, the best cure for cynicism is engagement.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what we lack. That is the number one thing that if I could fix anything, it would be that we talk about voter turnout and 57% versus the 70% in the state numbers that many of the counties had on the presidential. 70% is a big number. 70% in my mind, in my heart, is an embarrassment.
Oh yeah.
And that's just on voting. And voting is a big part of it, but people aren't watching what goes on in the State House. People aren't watching what goes on in Congress. They're seeing the ticker, but they're not reading and understanding what they see. And so you guys talked last week on your last episode with Brad Bird, and I listened to that, and he talked a little bit about fake news and the media and all that stuff that he's an expert on, and he's absolutely right. The one thing that I think that people in America are not taking responsibility for is themselves. They're not being a critical viewer of government and of the media. You see something that's not believable. You hear something on the street that's not believable. What do you do? I mean, the normal thing to do is to check.
Yeah,
is that right?
Right.
Let me read further. Let me read somebody else. And right now, people are accepting craziness as truth and walking away and blaming them for telling them the wrong stuff. It's like, really?
Right.
The National Enquirer has been at the checkout stand at the grocery store my entire life.
Yeah.
And you giggle at it. Now people are believing it. And it's like, whose fault is that?
Right.
The consumers are not taking enough responsibility for this stuff, and that's a lack of engagement. It's too easy and lazy to not do 20 more seconds and read an extra paragraph to find out whether or not this is legit or not. And I love The Onion, and I wish they would hire me. I mean, my number one goal in life, I would walk away from all this fame and fortune here in Indiana if The Onion would call me. But but I know what it is, and they know what they are, and it's fun, and there's a difference.
I have a great story about The Onion. So I worked on Capitol Hill for a member. And most people that probably listen to this podcast don't know who I used to work for. It is not our current congressman. I will just lay this out.
The anonymous congressman.
Yeah, it is not the current member of Congress from the 8th Congressional District. But my previous boss, our press secretary, would slide an Onion article in as the last article of his press clips every day. And most of the time, he never got to the last page or whatever. And there was one that was an Onion article about George W. Bush crying all the time. and how he just gets so worked up that he cries. Well, I don't know what happened, but the congressman reads the article and doesn't recognize it as satire exactly. So he comes back to the Ledge office and he goes to Mike's desk and he's like, I don't understand why he keeps doing this. What is this? Like, what, freaking out? Like, what is the president doing? And Mike had to eloquently explain to him that this was obviously satire, that President Bush does not spend a lot of time crying about, whatever the Onion article was. And from then on, it was like a running joke that we were going to see if we could get the congressman to bite the bullet and take the bait again. But it only happened once. He figured it out shortly there. But it was hilarious. He came back and just completely missed it and had to rail for a couple of minutes, and we had a good laugh at that.
Yeah.
So
I wish I could remember the subject matter, but I got when I used to do media relations for the agency I worked for, the roll call did an April Fool's joke.
Oh,
and I was
really?
doing clips at the time. So I've been there. It was some congressman getting out of prison and being appointed to his old seat, and I was like, wow, this is awesome, And
this is Jim trafficking?
Yeah,
That was real.
I was getting ready to say that really happened.
I got to tell you, I fell in love with C-SPAN because of Jim Trafficant. I was in college when that whole thing went down and he was on trial in the House. You want to talk about must-see TV, man. That guy was something else.
The hair alone was must-see TV.
Yeah, but Roll Call did a satire piece on it. It was trafficking.
Yeah, I was going to say, it had to be.
It was on that, but
Right.
but it was completely false. And I'm running down the hallway, passing it out to my bosses, and I hope he's not listening. But the least engaged commissioner of all came strolling down to my office saying, "I don't think this is factual." Like, you're the least funny, least engaged person, and you're calling me out as being below you on that scale. I'm out of here. Here's my resignation.
We touched on the purity issues and the purity of candidacy, and I think that Justin would probably agree that purity issues and purity to the party and the platform has been something that's kind of gave the Republicans issue. I think that's why Joe Donnelly ended up as senator, was because they ended up throwing Richard Murdoch at Dick Lugar. And I don't think that Joe Donnelly would have beat Dick Lugar because...
Hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. Richard Murdoch is the United States Senator from Indiana if he puts a period at the end of that sentence in that debate. Period. He made the one cardinal rule. Don't try to out pro-life someone that has a fairly decent record of being pro-life. Just don't try to outdo it. Just state where you're at and hit the other guy where you can actually score points. If Richard Murdoch puts a period at the end of that sentence and doesn't ramble on and play into the whole Todd Aiken perception deal, he's a United States Senator right now, like it or not.
I'm not going to disagree.
I don't want to say that Joe's the accidental senator, but he kind of is. Now, he's done a great job. I like Joe.
Absolutely.
I think he's done a fantastic job for the state. So I'm not saying that he wasn't qualified or anything, but he took a flyer. He did, he took a flyer on that race and hit the jackpot.
Well, but that wasn't a 10-point swing. That was
that was a couple points.
He was a couple points.
Oh no!
He was running a good campaign.
Oh, he was
tight.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it was going to win. I mean, I think that the way the tides turned, the way the tide was rolling, Richard Murdoch was going to be the senator from Indiana.
His mistakes served the state of Indiana quite well.
Very much so.
I don't disagree with you, but so let's not get too. But to your point,
Anyway, you were saying.
I mean, in looking to 2018 and Joe Donnelly, there are many people on the left in the Democratic Party that I hear from all the time that want to throw a more liberal person to primary Joe Donnelly and having the purity issues, and just kind of talking a little bit about 2018. What do you see the race coming out as? Who do you think will be the Republican nominee? Do you think that there's going to be somebody from the left that tries to pull Joe Donnelly to the left? Just speak a little bit about 2018 and what you think is going to happen.
I'm one of those. Senator Donnelly frustrates me on issues from time to time, but I'm also old enough, sadly, to know that the only person who's going to do exactly what I want to do in the U.S. Senate would be me, and voters sometimes aren't sophisticated enough to realize that. If you've got a guy that's with you 80-90% of the time, chalk that up as your guy. And Joe Donnelly is a good U.S. senator. He was a good congressman. He's a good person, and we're lucky to have him. So there are things that he has done and votes that he has taken that I would like to take him out back and say, hey, that's not what you're there to do. But as a total package, he's the guy. So I think it would be a huge mistake, and I would be surprised actually if there's someone that pulls him to the left, and disappointed actually because it's wasted energy. There are better
Absolutely.
things that can be done if you want to make changes to our government roster than to challenge Joe Donnelly. I think that Luke Messer is the guy. I think that it would be interesting if Curtis Hill threw in, and I think that I would be surprised if he's not thinking about it. There are a handful of us in Indianapolis that watch him very closely.
He was the highest vote getter in 2016, was he not?
He was.
Yes.
Yeah, by
By
all
a
time.
bunch. Yeah.
All time.
Yeah.
He got more votes than any man in the history of the state.
So, and he is a strange pot of stew. I mean, he is. As much as I want to dislike him, and there was a specific thing that I was unhappy with regard to Elkhart and Keith Cooper and those sorts of things. I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times, and he's a pretty charming guy. I mean, he's a pretty good guy. I mean, I've got
Elvis impersonator too. We have two of them in the State House now.
Again,
actually, that is
but
the thing.
but that's in the other file. I mean, that's I'm
I'm just throwing it out there. He's a fun guy. I'm just saying.
But I think that it's Messer. I do not understand the state's fascination with Congressman Rokita. I don't understand his fascination with promotion. He's got a district that's safe. I've got friends who are from his camp that worked with him when he was Secretary of State, and I just don't see that one. Luke is a guy who understands campaigns, and you can see the boxes being checked already, and the roster being built on his team. It's going to be hard, I think, for anybody to take him down.
He announced his finance committee, and
Yes.
there's nobody left.
Right.
There is nobody left.
Right.
He got all the big fish.
Right. Now, to his detriment, and the risk that he's got, if you want to consider that, this is our state, and 59% of the people voted for Donald Trump, or whatever the number was. He's all in with the president, and he's not separated himself at all. And it's a midterm election, and that we will see. Everything that we've seen in 65 days of his administration is. We haven't seen everything yet. And
Right.
So,
You're right.
So, people that are on that train, are going to have to take the good with the bad. And I don't
Right.
think that the momentum that Trump had, right at the right time last fall is going to be what it, that
Sure.
same thing in 18. And so, throwing all in and not being your own guy is a little bit of a risk. And for those of us who know Luke was Luke before Trump was on the ticket, but that will be forgotten statewide. And so I think that Joe Donnelly is going to be hard to take out. I just do.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, if you're someone with you 80, 90% of the time, you got to take that as a win. That's the frustration. I'm sure you have the same thing, Justin, of,
hands down.
You've got to look at when you've got someone that's 80 or 90% versus 0 or 10%, you've got to go with the best option. Sometimes 80% is a win, and you've got to take that as a win. And I'm really hoping that we're not going to see a more liberal candidate come out and try to take out Joe Donnelly or drag him more to the left, because it's going to do nothing but hurt him in the general election.
Ideologically, he doesn't need to move to the left.
No.
I think he's tough to beat right where he's at.
Yeah.
Right. I think that the ideology is an interesting discussion in and of itself, mainly because of who our president is. And again, I wrote about this, I talk about it, and it confuses people and angers people when you talk about it. One of the biggest problems that we have with Donald Trump being president, it's not so much the erratic behavior that will probably cost him dearly over the next few weeks and months with the high-profile controversies that he has. It's that his lack of ideology makes him a wild card that is dangerous, because people end up supporting him as the problem solver. Whatever your solution is, we trust you to make it. And that's the Mussolini style. and you say that exactly, the giggles that you get out of that are entertaining, and it's good to giggle at, but that's exactly how you get away from a self-governing ethic that has carried this country for 240 years. We need to know what your ideals are. And his ideal is whatever works today. I wake up and the Twitter idea is this, and that's what I'm going to fire off. And that is very, very troubling when you're in charge of militaries and you're in charge of healthcare systems and you're in charge of things that are life altering. You don't know what to expect and what he's going to do.
Well,
and he says things like, me alone, I alone can solve this. And it's like, wow, doesn't matter how, I alone can solve this. That's a dangerous thing.
And he's learning it right now very quickly.
He is. I'm rooting for the Freedom Caucus, not because it has, lasting effect. I hope they kick this down, and I hope he has a loss, and I hope it helps train him.
I hope
government
so too.
is more complicated than he thought it was.
Discipline is
who knew that healthcare was so complicated?
Right.
Who knew that it was so complicated?
And again, it goes back to there's a fundamental lack of discipline. Yeah. Fundamental lack of discipline, and it 95% of the stew that he is waiting in is self-inflicted.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about it. The thing that I don't know about is whether it's sheer brilliance or sheer incompetence at this point. Because every time he gets into something, somebody on his team says something more outrageous, more ridiculous, see Kellyanne Conway and the microwaves, or Sean Spicer at his daily press conference, and the media seems to just run after that squirrel. Now, I think now that we're 65 or whatever days in, they're starting to understand that Kellyanne Conway is not credible at all, that Sean Spicer has an audience of one, and as long as Donald Trump's happy, he's going to keep saying what he has to say to keep his job. And, the Russia thing's starting to stick. There's a real problem there.
There's a lot that's starting to accumulate on that.
Yeah, and how much of it is smoke versus how much of it is fire, and how much of it is smoke being fanned by the White House themselves because they're mishandling the thing.
Well,
and no one seems to know.
The horrifying thing that happened this week, or became more evident this week, is his problem is starting to adversely affect our institutions.
Oh, absolutely.
Our precious institutions. And so when you have John McCain making comments that Congress is no longer credible on this issue, it is March. I mean, we're only a few weeks into this. And Congress has already lost its credibility because Nunes decides to get a report and hop in his car and fly down to the White House to tattle to the guy he's investigating. Now the Oversight Committee is without standing anymore because of that little move, and shines a spotlight on the fact that Nunes was on the transition team and the oversight chair at the same time. Right. And so our institutions are now being threatened by that lack of discipline you talk about. And that is important. That is really important. So when I take out after Donald Trump, sometimes I have a little snark that maybe I should dial down. But the fact of the
it's hard not to have that snark.
But the fact of the matter is, it's not, again, about ideology. It's about, you need to have respect for the job.
Right.
You have to have respect for the institution, and that lack of respect is starting to threaten it beyond just you.
Right.
Now, what are we going to do with the next guy?
Right. And that's
is this becoming normal?
Right.
We can't let this become normal because it's not, and it shouldn't be, and it wasn't the intention, and it's not what the American people envision when you say self-governing. This isn't what it looks like.
Right. And it's frustrating too, because I could argue that you don't necessarily have to agree with obviously a lot of what the Republicans were doing. We literally had the deepest field, probably, at least in recent memory, of qualified guys to be president of the United States. I mean, we had United States senators.
Well, it was a crowded stage.
We had
that's
governors.
Yeah, it was certainly crowded if they were all qualified.
Right. Well, I mean, I could go through the list. I mean, you've got Jeb. I mean, Marco's a young guy, but he's an accomplished United States senator. You had multiple governors. You had a lot of talent on that stage, and any one of them would have been a decent president, I think, and it would have at least held. Like I said, you might not agree with the ideology of it, but they were at least qualified to be president.
Of the 17 guys that
and the one guy that wasn't is the guy we pick.
Yeah, of the 17 guys I remember, a good solid dozen of them would have been respectful of the institutions.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, granted, we all had some crazy.
I don't know if I'll go over a dozen. But
fair. Ben Carson would have been a little concerning.
But it was a deep stage. Yeah. And there were a lot of talented guys that have done some really good things in their respective states and in their previous service. And we pick the one guy.
The guy that's setting his hair on fire.
I honestly think that there's an element of the electorate that voted for him with an expectation that he would become presidential, that he would become respectful of it at some
with
point.
no evidence
of it
that was the case.
But at some point, he would understand that when the CIA comes in and says, "This is your duty, Mr. President," that he would say "okay," as opposed to "hell no." And so, or "I know better than you."
I'm president and you're not.
Right, I'm president and you're not. A quote this week to Time magazine. Yeah, it's like this is an exercise in narcissism like none has ever been seen before, and so I still have some hope that he's going to get a comeuppance that will be of value. That's the only hope. That's the only thing that I can cling to at this point that's going to see us through.
And I think we're all in that boat. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we're all in that boat. I think we're all sort of reaping what we sowed here, and all like you said, it's kind of like anybody that wants to see the guy fail recognizes that he's flying the ship, and we're all on it.
Well,
and if he crashes and burns, it's going to hurt everybody.
I had a conversation with someone yesterday and said, I got 2 words for you that ought to scare the hell out of you with this administration. And they said, "What?" And I said, "North Korea."
Right.
We've got a real problem over there, and he didn't create that problem. I mean, he
he
inherited it, and it's evolved over time. But that's like the 6th story on the nightly news.
And it should be the first or
Seriously?
second. Right.
That's number 6.
Right. And we're talking about microwaves.
Yeah.
We're talking about microwave spying on people and whether President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower.
And I'm absolutely okay with it being number 2 around healthcare and jockeying for position. But when you get to 7:20 p.m. and now we're talking about the 12th missile launch over there.
At least the last one failed anyway.
Yeah.
At least it failed.
Yeah.
So at least there's good news. Maybe it wasn't dramatic enough.
Well, yeah.
It's warm and fuzzy. They screwed it up, guys.
Yeah, but maybe the next fail is it lands here.
Right, exactly.
So that's a big concern that now the Wall Street Journal did an editorial this week about he's no longer believable. The administration is no longer believable, and so
it took him 65 days to come up with that.
Right. That's his paper. I
Right.
mean, these are his guys that have been pretty kind to him.
Absolutely.
And so now you can't trust him. When the Wall Street Journal says you can't take him at his word anymore, and it's March. For the love of God, it's March.
I know.
It's not March of 2019. It's March. He just won the election just a few months ago, and so that's disturbing that we're not in a better shape. With
Does
North
he
Korea.
survive his first term?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
You think President Pence is a thing, huh?
I do.
How does it happen? Do you think he walks away?
Yes.
You think he just says, "I'm done"?
Yeah. I do.
At what point do you think? What point do you think Donald Trump's ego lets him walk away? Though
It'll be my prediction, and again, you baited me into making predictions again.
Yeah, it did.
Because this program has a very good track record of correct predictions.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I need somebody else to be wrong because every time I say something, Donald Trump immediately makes me look like an idiot on this podcast.
All of you listeners out there, I've been hypnotized into making a prediction. Just stay away from this part of Evansville.
It's the donut bank. Is what it is. It's the sugar.
That's right. I'm almost at the end of this donut bank coffee, which is remarkable, by the way. I think I think he goes out like Nixon does. He'll go out when he knows he has to, when he has no other options left, and where he can still cling to his terms.
Right.
I think that's what happens. The impeachment process is too tedious.
And takes so long to get done.
Yeah, and again, that's another thing. 25 years ago, a president that was having the kind of trouble that this president has doesn't have the ability to go to the Hill and try to push through a healthcare plan.
Right.
They don't listen to him anymore.
Right.
I mean, when they're worried about treason, they're not listening to you about healthcare.
Right.
That's the way Congress and the Hill used to work.
Right.
And now they're taking his meetings.
And here's
if
the
I'm
deal.
on the Hill, I wouldn't even take his meetings right now.
Here's the deal. And this is what concerns me. And you were in it. In 96, 97, 98. I think, right, wrong, or indifferent, I think the impeachment of Bill Clinton was sort of the end of government as we know it. in a lot of ways, because at the end of the day, you were never going to get a conviction.
Right.
It was, I mean, he lied under oath. He did. Committed perjury. That's a big deal. But it was over something stupid. I mean, not to say that infidelity in the Oval Office is not a big deal, but is it really reached the level that we need to be removing a guy from office when 3/4 of The guys investigating him, we had to pack 3 or 4 of them and ship them back. I just don't think, especially with the Republicans being in charge, that impeachment's on the table, regardless of what happens.
I don't know.
I hope I'm wrong. If it comes to that and he really does step out and there is something to this Russia thing.
There are a couple of things that I think make it difficult to chalk it up just in those terms. And one is the military. Okay. And the other is the intelligence community. The battle that he is in, the 3 battles that he's going to have a hard time winning is that the military, he has to have their confidence. The military is a huge bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
That bureaucratic resistance, there is no greater bureaucratic resistance than the military.
Right.
If people don't believe that you're a legitimate leader, that's a tough one to overcome when you're talking about the military. Same goes for our intelligence community. And he hasn't alienated the military yet publicly that we know of. The intelligence community is not with him.
Right.
That's a huge problem. And the media is not with him. And so he has chosen those battles. He will lose those battles. He's going to have to come their way.
Right.
And he hasn't shown the ability to do that. Congress will cave.
You think so?
Behind that.
I think so?
I do. And when the military says, Mr. President, you've got to do something about North Korea, or you've got to do something different about North Korea, that becomes a litmus test on that regard. And so the pressure that you get from those 2 sectors of government and the media, Congress people are weak in that they want to stay in Congress.
That's a fair point.
That's why 2018 will be so big, especially if the Democrats can take the House. Then it's a completely new ballgame.
I don't disagree with that. I'm still...
I don't know if you can run an entire election cycle on that issue. We're going to have to really get back to more of the meaty issues and the issues that actually matter to our voters. But I think that's going to end up being something that's still kind of in the background of the voters' minds.
But I go back to the idea that we elected a guy that had no ideological animus at all.
Right.
He just tells people what they want to hear, or he just says outrageous stuff, and people listen to it.
One of the reasons why midterm elections, though, are what they are is that the American people vote for a president, elect a president, and expect the results that they dreamed were possible.
Right.
Barack Obama had it's common that first term,
Sure.
that first midterm is brutal. And,
Right.
And with the maps that we had, I was talking about this last summer that if Hillary wins, 2018 is going to be a terrible year for Democrats.
Right.
And flip it around.
Sure.
It would have been different had it been John Kasich. It would not have been as extreme. But the people who voted for Donald Trump expect results because he promised them.
Oh yeah,
and
no doubt,
those results aren't possible. I mean, even if he had an immaculate two years, they're not possible. I have lots of family that live in Appalachia, and I have a couple of them that believe that Trump is the guy. And I said, write it down, write what your life is like today, and think about that before you vote in 2018. And you tell me whether or not he delivered. It changed your life. And that's the main thing. It's not just that he delivered a health care bill. It's that, did that have an impact on your life? And the fact of the matter is it's very difficult for a president to do that in the daily life of an American in a 2-year stretch. And so that's the reason why midterms are tough.
Right.
This guy is throwing gas on that fire.
Oh, I don't disagree.
it's
I moderated a third house a couple of weeks ago, and Rashawn shows up.
We should talk about the third houses.
We're in sleepy Poseyville, Indiana, where generally you get 20 people, and everybody's happy, and wants to know about net metering, which we ended up talking about. We talked about net metering. Hold on, no. I don't mean to walk you into that, but literally,
don't hypnotize me.
No. But literally, like, that is the topic the topic du jour at these things. It's crazy. We've done 2 of them, and of the 4 hours, we've probably talked 50 minutes on net metering. Of those 4 hours,
I'm actually happy to hear that.
And
the weeds are being discussed finally.
Well, I'm not really sure. It's a fairly one-sided conversation because the one side gets really amped up. But no, we had 130 people, and it was rambunctious, but it was quasi-respectful. I had to crack the whip a couple of times, but nothing great. Nobody got up and pointed fingers and started swearing, and
nothing that was going to end up on CNN.
There were no signs.
Over and over again, and
but. It did remind me of a lot of 2010. Now, granted, I think to the congressman's credit, he answered every question. The problem was they didn't want to hear what he was saying, which I think is part of the problem when you talk about engagement. When you have people yelling when the congressman makes the point that Canadians do actually come to the United States for healthcare because our system happens to work better than most Canadians, don't have to wait as long in the United States. And they claim, what's your source? Because that's not true. And I Google search it, and it's the second story from U.S. News and World Report that Canadians are, in fact, coming to the United States for healthcare. People believe what they want to believe, and there is no discussion about it. And it happens to both sides. I'm not picking. This is just the one example that I have of many. But we got to get back to that earlier point of proper engagement. Mm-hmm. Anger only gets you so far. Now, granted, it worked for the Tea Party pretty well,
and anger essentially got a president as well.
But I don't necessarily think it was for the better. I don't necessarily think the Freedom Caucus is doing the Republican Party any favors. Well, I don't think the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party is doing the Democratic Party any favors. Now, maybe I'm an establishment shill and a rhino, which I'm sure is probably well established at this point because I haven't drank the Trump Kool-Aid from word go. But it doesn't. We can't have a discussion of ideas and it not turn into I'm just going to believe what I want to believe and to hell with you.
One of the things that again, since this latest public meeting and third house get-togethers and all that stuff has been so prominent on our national news with the videos and the demonstrations and all that sort of stuff, to me, that's still their job to show up and take it.
Absolutely.
I don't disagree
and I'm
with that.
glad that Congressman Bouchon did that.
He was the most level-headed guy in the room.
Donnelly had a large
one
one
up
this
in
week.
Muncie.
I agree completely.
But then there are others who are doing it in a whole different style because they don't want to be in that room with people getting up and pointing their fingers and yelling obscenities. And I have been lucky enough in my career to have gathered a crowd a time or two, and had to stand in front of them.
Come on, Michael.
I just that's a whole other show. But when you're in a room and there are hundreds of people and they're mad and they're yelling and screaming at you and you're a public servant, that's part of the job,
right?
And if you're not willing to show up and do that, and let them get it off their chest, whether they're real or not, that's not an excuse.
I completely agree.
I think that I would walk into that situation with it is my job to let these people participate in their government,
sure,
no matter how offensive it might be,
right?
And take it. And I'm very frustrated by people trying to manage it by having private one-on-one meetings on an assembly line sort of thing. And I've heard some stories about other ways of conducting their greet the public, Congress people's greet the public style. And I don't respect that at all. Let people get up and say what they want to say. Nod your head, listen, take notes, respond if you can. If you can't, say thanks for sharing, and it's important for them to hear it. So
sure. I just wish we could be more constructive with it, though. I mean, I see both sides of the issue. I really do. Having been a district director and having dealt with it, is it really constructive to just get yelled at because no one wants to hear what you have to say? And granted, it's part of the process and it's part of the deal, and I think they ought to do it. But I also feel like we ought to have a two-way street where we can at least try to be productive about it.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's where the fault line is.
I think it's important for Congressman Bouchon to have the opportunity to say, "This is what's important to me. This is what I'm there to do."
Right.
This is my answer to that question or that complaint. I think,
and he did. And to his credit, he answered every question. And quite frankly, he took on topics before they even got asked because he knew they were coming. So I'll obviously. He's my former boss, so I'm probably a little partial. But even if I wasn't, taking that hat off, I thought he handled a hostile room pretty well.
There's a phenomenon in place right now, though, that Congresspeople and elected officials need to address, and this is a good example. I'm glad we're talking about this. Is that Congressman Bouchon represents all of the people of that district,
absolutely,
even the people who voted against him, and just like Donald Trump represents all the Americans who voted for Hillary. He's the president of the country, not the president of the people who voted for him, and that is not new. That's not something that Donald Trump created. And no disrespect to Congressman Bouchon, I'm sure that he's a good congressman. I don't have any complaints about him at all. I'm just saying that is a function. When I worked for a state agency, I listened to a lot of people who were enraged by the things that we were doing in government at the time, and that didn't free me from being their servant.
Right.
I still worked for them.
Sure.
And I think that we lose that a little bit because you want to tune out the people who aren't telling you what you want to hear or aren't giving you awards and rah-rah on every decision that you've made. The fact of the matter is they are every bit as important as the person who does agree with you, and we're losing that a little bit because it's easier to go the other way. And so I wish that would stop.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. What else you want to talk about? You got anything else? I know we're getting on that hour and 12 minutes, I think, or getting close to it.
I didn't know we had a limit.
No, we don't. We can go as long as you want to, but you got to get you back to Indianapolis. So what have we not talked about that you really want to hit?
I want to talk about bias crimes. I
Okay.
want to talk about that.
All right. Let's do it.
I'm very, very frustrated that the state of Indiana is one of 5 states in the country that doesn't have anything on the books, manipulative or not, anything of significance that states a policy on what our government should do when a bias crime occurs. And I've been working on this personally and in the Statehouse for a couple of years and doing a lot of talking with others and a lot of listening and learning a lot. And what I'm learning is interesting, but it's very frustrating to me that we can't find a way to come out with a policy statement from the Statehouse that we're not going to put up with people vandalizing Jewish cemeteries and shooting people, threatening them because they're Muslim or because they have a disability or because of their identification with the LGBT community. I just don't understand why we can't address that. It is domestic terrorism, and there's a huge level of ignorance on what this means. There are plenty of people who hide behind. I'm not a subscriber of the thought police, and it doesn't matter why you did it. Those kinds of debates. Frustrating thing for me is that, if you spray paint, Mike loves Amy on the side of a building, it's graffiti. If you spray paint a swastika on the side of a Jewish temple, that's a hate crime. And
Sure.
and so you're now victimizing a group of people with your behavior, and it's not just graffiti. And all the bias crimes bill was asking is to have a policy statement to allow for that second example to receive an elevated sentence, and the reluctance in the Indiana General Assembly to do that is just baffling to me.
This is one of those times where I completely agree with you. So Kumbaya is not going to sell because being in Indianapolis, when that first bomb threat went to the Indianapolis Jewish
the
Center,
JCRC,
and literally
JCC.
the next day, a bullet hole ends up in the synagogue here,
Yeah.
Right.
and then a week later, another bomb threat gets called in.
Right.
And I've got Jewish friends in Indianapolis, and it's amazing that we live in the 21st century and have to deal with some of this stuff.
Right, and one of the fundamental problems is that establishing a policy doesn't take away from anyone. What is being sacrificed?
Right.
By us saying we're not going to put up with that. Who is it we're defending?
Right.
By
the guys
not
that do it.
Yeah. The only
the
winners
day.
are the only winners are the guys who are doing it. And so I hear people that don't the evangelical right saying it's really just a backhanded way to impede on our standing in the community, and it's just like the paranoia there is mind-boggling to me. I don't get that at all. I would love, and quite frankly, evangelicals can have hate crimes committed against them.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely they can. Yeah, I know. It is
So
baffling.
I
It's
don't
not an issue.
This is not a risk, and that's the problem I think with a lot of people
Right.
that are in government now. Take a risk every now and then, and my book refers to me as a progressive.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see change that makes sense, not
Right.
change for change's sake. This is an easy one. Come on, guys, this is
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
And so that's a frustrating thing. I just wanted to get that in there. Before
Sure, and we touched on it briefly, and it's not
Yeah.
something that in my role in the State House that we would really weigh in on too much, but it's something that's really opened my eyes. I didn't really have an opinion before a lot of this has gone down, but 2016 was a rough election cycle, and there was whether it was purposely unleashed or not. You can debate that all day long. I don't necessarily think Donald Trump is inherently racist, but it unleashed something that we haven't seen in a long time. Or maybe we did, and it was just I lived a sheltered life, but it's not a great time.
I think part of it was always kind of there. It was just there was somebody out there saying things on TV and in public that they say in their house where nobody else hears them. And it gave them kind of the ability to say, okay, this guy is talking like me. He is saying some of the things that I say in private. And it gave them that ability to come forward and start saying it more in public and going it and screaming it at people and
Right.
things
Well,
like that.
I think the advent of social media hasn't helped. There's a certain
Absolutely
anonymity
not. Yeah.
that goes with Twitter and Facebook and stuff that people get comfortable hiding behind this mask of whatever they want to put out there. And at some point it perpetuates to they get comfortable enough to do it publicly at some point. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that as well. And it's scary. It really is. And you know, again, to your point, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I completely agree with you. And the amendment that killed it was just frustrating.
Yeah.
To hat tip your buddy Senator Delph. Wow.
Yeah.
I think the anonymity is the big issue, especially on Twitter when it's so easy to be anonymous. You know, I've got a friend who works for The Hill in D.C., you know, reporting on healthcare news, and every time that she tweets out an article, almost every single time, there will be nasty comments about her. She's gotten death threats on there. I mean, it's the anonymity that they can say all of these things, and it's not going to get back to them, that they don't have to put their name on it. That's really created a lot of the discourse that I think kind of helped propel Donald Trump to victory.
I still say Hillary Clinton did her own demise. I don't know that
were there issues in the Hillary Clinton campaign? Absolutely, and we've talked about that. But
she cost herself the election. Let's be real here. We've talked about this enough. I've browbeaten you over it. I've made the point. We can move on now.
Yeah,
but still,
boy, you wish she was here now.
Oh, I'm not a Trump guy, and I have been very steadfast about that fact from the word go.
That is a very good place to be.
Don't blame me. I voted for Jeb. I'm just saying. I was one of the 37 people that voted for Jeb Bush in for
poor
president.
Jeb.
Poor guy. All right. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Great time. Look forward to diving into the book. If you want to check it out, Contrary to Popular Belief, A Chronicle of a Progressive in Indiana. I know there is one copy at the Barnes & Noble in Evansville still.
Yes,
I check on it every time I'm there.
Please, people in Evansville, do not take that book off the shelf.
Go to Contrary.
Order it online so I can keep my book on the shelf there.
Go to contrariana.com. And I find it amusing because he's like stuck beside Mark Levin. Of all people, so it's really a yin and a yang kind of thing.
I'm surprised they have the Mark Levin books in the nonfiction section.
It books in.
Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did. That was awesome. You got Mark Levin on one side, and Mitch McConnell on the other, and poor Leppert stuck in the middle. Although McConnell's book, is
someone go to Barnes & Noble, take Michael's book out of the fiction section if it's over there by Mitch McConnell and Mark Levin. Get it back in that nonfiction section where it belongs.
You can make fun of Mark Levin. I will not stand for you making fun of Mitch McConnell.
We're close to the river, but I don't know who this Mitch McConnell person is.
I will not stand for it. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Contrariana.com. Check it out. Michael's a great writer. He's got a lot of really interesting thoughts. Check out the book, too, when you can. You can order it online, contrariana.com. Again, this is Justin Grainer.
Matthew Neville.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Politics Aside. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.